Controversies continue to swirl around President Trump's immigration policies and his approach to the Mueller report and his administration's pretty brazen announcement that it will defy federal laws in providing tax returns to Congress. All important issues. But right now I want to turn to a special report we've prepared for you about another big story that may fly under the radar for some Americans. It is about who has the power to make huge decisions about your money and holding banks accountable. And what are we all going to do if there's another financial crash? And if you've been alive for a while, you know there often are downturns, if not crashes, eventually. I'm talking, of course, about the Fed. Now, can you think of, say, President Trump's last nominee to run the Fed? A lot of people can't. It's Jerome Powell, a lawyer and former private equity executive who was considered a pretty moderate Republican before joining and a consensus builder across parties. He's served on the Fed board since 2012, and he also worked in the Treasury under George H.W. Bush. I tell you all that to give you a sense of basically who is currently in charge. Now, many people do remember how pivotal the Fed can be in a crash. Journalist Andrew Ross Sorkin tracking how it came down to some bankers and regulators in a room like the one you're looking at to try to prevent that crash from becoming a depression. This was all later adapted in the HBO film Too Big to Fail.
I'm running a company. If the Fed tells me I can't offer competitive pay for talent, you're going to launch the biggest brain drain this country's ever seen. Is that the way you want to run the banks?
Until the money is repaid to the Treasury, there will be some limitations on tax deductions and golden parachutes.
Well, there you go.
I don't really understand why there needs to be so much tension about this. The country is facing the worst economy since the Great Depression. If the financial system collapses, it will take every one of you down.
Give me the papers.
Give me the papers. There are plenty of criticisms of how the Fed runs and how it should run, but there is a nonpartisan premise that has generally been accepted that at the Fed you want independence, meaning people who are just going to follow evidence and not short-term partisan posturing, and you obviously want expertise. You only want heart surgery from a doctor, and while people do lean left or right, you want your Fed run by experts typically. Which brings us to President Trump pushing two people for the Fed who critics are loudly saying tonight break with those traditions in several ways. Trump pushing pizza magnate and conservative media star Herman Cain and economic pundit Stephen Moore for these powerful posts to run America's central bank, the Federal Reserve of the United States. We are talking about the entity that, at least on a good day, is supposed to handle inflation, unemployment, bank regulation, while managing risk and emergencies that can hit the United States and international markets at any given time. Now, Stephen Moore advised Cain's campaign. He helped Trump on his tax plan. And if you remember Obama's Treasury Secretary nominee getting grilled over his tax problems, it's also worth noting that Mr. Moore owes $75,000 in back taxes and penalties. Some see him as an odd choice for the Fed because he's questioned whether it should even, quote, exist, and called at one point for all its members to be tossed.
I believe the people on the Federal Reserve Board should be thrown out for economic malpractice. Donald Trump wanted to, drain the swamp. Well, John, the Fed is a swamp, and he's
picked one of the alligators.
Exactly.
Exactly. The Fed is the swamp, or whatever. Well, with the promotion now on the table, we can note, because we want to update what Moore is saying, now he has a different tune. Now, people can decide whether this reflects a, quote, learning curve or a kind of opportunism. Here he is this month talking down some of his past tone in a new interview.
By the way, I'm kind of new to this game, frankly, so I'm going to be on a steep learning curve myself about how the Fed operates, how the Federal Reserve makes its decisions, and this is a real exciting opportunity for me. So it's hard for me to say, what my role will be there.
Herman Cain ran Godfather's Pizza. He also served in a non-policy post in the 1990s at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, and then made his bid for the presidency. Now, taking these candidates seriously does mean taking their record seriously. When Cain was warming up for that presidential run, he was still advocating putting the United States back on the gold standard.
Measurements must be dependable. That means getting back to a gold standard, because the measurement of the dollar is not dependable, because we spend too much and inflation is going through the roof.
Those are not just talking points. This is what Cain believes. He stood by it in 2017. Now, is he going to change the position? has even talked with the president about it. As for Kane's argument, most economists disagree with the claim that using the gold standard in order to stabilize inflation is a good trade-off. In presidential debates, he also pushed his 999 tax plan, which many people said wasn't quite a holistic economic policy.
Well, but will the people in Nevada not have to pay Nevada sales tax and in addition pay the 9% tax?
Governor Romney, you're doing the same thing that they're doing. You're mixing apples and oranges. You're going to pay the state. No. You're going to pay the state sales tax no matter what.
Right.
Whether you throw out the existing code and you put in our plan, you're still going to pay that. That's apples and oranges.
Fine.
Yes.
And I'm going to be getting a bushel basket that has apples and oranges in it because I'm going to pay both taxes.
No.
And the people in Nevada don't want to pay both taxes.
Beyond the economic catchphrase, there were other things about Herman Cain that gave people pause about his pursuit of the Oval Office.
999 means jobs, jobs, jobs.
That's what I'm talking about.
You Becky, stand.
And I believe these words came from the Pokemon movie. Shucky Ducky!
We should note Cain did drop out of his presidential bid after facing 5 allegations of sexual misconduct. He has denied them. One way to read all of this is that at bottom, maybe Donald Trump is still going for pro-Wall Street conservatives, maybe more colorful than typical Fed picks. And so you could argue it's sort of a Trumpy shell around the core preferences of GOP's economic conservative wing. But by that logic, you would expect Wall Street to like these picks or be comfortable with them. And tonight, I can tell you the news is that's not the case. Wall Street, which did largely back Trump's tax plan and looks the other way, I should say, on some of his other issues, is headed towards something of a small uproar over these picks. 60% of a new CNBC Fed survey saying the Senate should reject more. 53% of these bankers take that position on Cain, whose name came out later. 70% of the respondents say both are too political and not qualified. A higher share say both men just aren't up to the job. Now, that's just one measure, but it is striking. And some of these figures from this economic survey going on the record, quote, both Moore and Cain are highly unconventional and politically biased choices, and they'd be very disruptive at a time when monetary policy is at an important crossroads, said the chief U.S. financial market economist at Oxford Economics. So, when you take it all together, President Trump may welcome that, this is controversial. He actually has been blasting his own pick for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, whose life could get harder if people like Moore and Cain are confirmed. But when you think to where we started, what happens in that room that most people never see, these important regulators dealing with bankers who in 2008 had one of the biggest decisions ever to make, the question that, according to the CNBC survey, that Wall Street is concerned about, and maybe a lot of other people should be as well, is the American economy, which is your money and your retirement accounts, safer with Herman Cain and Stephen Moore in that room making those big decisions? We thought it was a question worth raising tonight. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.